and welcome to Beyond the Mirror podcast. I have a pleasure today to introduce a very special guest, Ollie Phillips. He's a founder of Optimist Performance, and I had a great pleasure to meet him through the business program 10K Small Businesses by Goldman Sachs. We both completed this business program a year ago, and today I have a great pleasure to welcome Ollie to have some very interesting chat with me. So Ollie is not an ordinary human. He pushes his body and mind beyond the limits, from being a England Rugby Sevens captain to setting multiple Guinness World Records. Welcome, Ollie.
Hi, Ola. Thanks ever so much for having me. Chuffed to be here and lovely to see you and love to be sort of reacquainted and back together following our 10KSB exploits with Goldman Sachs.
Well, it's a real pleasure, Ollie. Can you please tell us a little bit more? How do you do these things? How you push your body through all those challenges and, most important, mindset?
I mean, it's a great question. The honest answer is I don't think I've ever sort of assessed it as an overall picture as to like how are we going to do this. I think it's that classic adage that you hear a lot of the time about how do you eat an elephant? I mean, it's massive, it's huge, you don't know where to start, but just go in small pieces and small chunks. And I think often with these things you can become overawed and probably not do them if you focus on all the reasons as to why it's going to be difficult. Um, and if you focus on the huge challenge of like, okay, it's too big an elephant, if you like. So I think that's always been the approach for me mentally, is to just sort of approach it from a piecemeal perspective, like what's the first steps that we can take on. And that's always helped my mental preparation for these things, is to like, look, I'd never sailed before, I've never rowed before, so if I use that as the ingredients at the beginning, then I'd never do anything. But if I just focus on actually, okay, what's the next stages in order to ensure that we can do these things, then, if you like, an ordinary person can achieve an extraordinary thing. And I've found that that's been a consistent theme, a consistent passage in all these challenges, whether they be in sport, in business, or in adventure.
Well, this is very impressive, and most definitely you pushing your mind beyond the limit. And I think you achieve most than any ordinary person can. Let's just start with World Guinness records. I know that you have beaten four. Am I correct?
4 Guinness World Records, that is true. Ola, look at that. I mean, they give them away these days.
Can you please tell me a little bit more about them?
Yeah, sure. So when I finished my rugby career, I think like most athletes, professional athletes, I went through that sort of transition period, not entirely sure about what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be, where I go next. I always say in sport, you retire twice. You retire at sort of 30, 35. You need to find a whole new career. And I was definitely in that transition period at the beginning. But what I did have was a lot of sort of mental fortitude, physical capability that would enable me to sort of take on challenges, and I relished that. I wanted to go and sail around the world. I wanted to go to the North Pole and whatever else. But I also had another part of me which was quite sort of philanthropic. I really wanted to do these things so that there was an impact. I wasn't necessarily, they weren't vanity projects for me. I wanted to make sure that there was a bit of a legacy, and that legacy for me was that we were raising money and awareness for charitable causes. And so these 4 world records were world record attempts um, to try and do something extraordinary that would raise awareness for a charitable cause. So we set a Guinness World Record, and and to caveat that, because my background was in sport and in particular in rugby, I wanted to align it to sport in some capacity and my sport. So take on a challenge that nobody had ever really done before in sort of quite hostile, challenging environments, so that people are and a community can be built around that. We raise a lot of money, and in the process, we do like a world first, which obviously in itself garners more interest. So we set a Guinness World Record for the most northerly game of rugby ever played in history. So that was at the North Pole. We trekked 100 miles to the North Pole, and then we set up a pitch and played a game of rugby at the North Pole. And
How
then
many of
because
you were there? How
so we
many?
had, so it had to be a fully recognised game of rugby. So that can either be 15s or sevens. So we went for sevens because we have to take fewer people. So as a result, we had 16 people that came with us to the poll. Um, and because of the success of that, because of the interest of that garnered, because of the money that we raised, I did it for a children's charity called the Wooden Spoon. Um, they support like disadvantaged and disabled children around the UK. So we raised a phenomenal amount of money for them. And because of that, they said, look, oh, 4 years later, well, would you be up for doing it again? Why don't we go and set a world record for the highest game of rugby ever played in history? And they found a place on the glacier on the Tibetan side of Everest that was about 6,500 meters up, just above Advanced Space Camp, where we could potentially play a game of rugby. The difference in the North Pole to this was North Pole was challenging because of the wind, the snow, the pole itself, the crevasses, etc. But you were at sea level, so you didn't have altitude to worry about. And on Everest, even when you go to base camp, let alone advanced base camp, you have altitude to be worried about. And then if you're going to try and play a game of rugby, you've got people in theory running around at altitude. So we needed to take a much bigger contingency of people because we were conscious of that we might lose some just because they get altitude sickness. Not dying, although don't worry, but like we might just might get
I
injured at
was
the
worried
altitude.
for a minute.
Yeah. So so that's what we did. We set the 2 world records on Everest for playing the sort of highest games of rugby in history.
Am I right to say that one of your records was the fastest time on climbing the top of the Everest mountain?
No, sadly not. I mean, I'd love to lay claim to that one, but no, we wouldn't. So we set 2 world records on Everest for the highest games of rugby. They were the world records that we set, and they were um, the highest game of mixed touch, so male and female, and the highest game of physical contact rugby. So it was still centered around my sport. I mean, I'd love to have. In fact, I don't know if I would have loved to because it would have been horrible. But going the fastest up and fastest down Everest would be brutal. I mean, that would be brutal. I think the fastest time that has now been done is like 17 hours, and I don't know how they did that, but yeah. So I can't lay claim to that one, but
What was your time?
uh, well, overall, these things you spend a phenomenal amount of time on these mountains, right? Acclimatizing, and I think what's interesting about these things, obviously, everyone's in a rush to get to the top. So the answer to your question was, it was we were there for about 7 weeks, and the actual sort of summit pushes and going up and down and going to advanced base camp and whatever else was probably about two days, 3 days. But I think that what you're seeing now actually in this adventure space is everybody's desperate to try and do it as fast as possible. And weirdly, I find that quite sad because these environments are so unique and so special, and you only really get to appreciate them if you spend some time in them. Um, so in one sense, I find it sad that it's almost like they come and go in a day, and you're like, well, look, you've been on the highest mountain in the world, and yet you've not really learned anything about it. You've not learned anything about the community that's around it. You never really, you haven't really invested enough time into it. And the other part I think that's quite risky and sad is like it's seriously dangerous. Like these environments are extremely hostile, and Mother Nature is you know fairly uncompromising when it comes to like if there is only one boss in that environment, and that is the mountain, that is Mother Nature. And I think that
I
everyone's so desperate to get to the top, they often can fall foul of Mother Nature, and then that's when some real problems can happen.
I would imagine those activities and events take a huge amount of time of planning and preparation.
Yeah, huge. I mean, some of them now are Everest is a well-trodden mountain, so lots of people understand the mountain and they know how to sort of navigate its complexities. But I'll be honest, every single time is different. You could go to Everest 10 times, 9 times, you could have no altitude problems, nothing. You'd be totally fine. You think you've got altitude sickness nailed. You go on the 10th and bam, like there is no rule. And in one sense, that's amazing because every experience is unique. In another sense, it, it defies all planning, if that makes sense. So obviously you need to turn up prepared and ready to rock and roll for whatever eventuality, whatever challenge you're taking on. But there's also this unwritten rule and this acceptance that people have that if it's not your time, it's not your time, and you have to sort of have that humility to just say, okay, we'll turn around and try another day.
Your recent challenge was a rowing across Atlantic. Can you please tell us more about this?
Yeah, so I took part in something called the world's toughest row. For those people that don't know what that is, it is a rowing race that starts in a place called La Gomera in the Canary Isles, and you race 3,000 miles across the Atlantic into Antigua, into Nelson's Dockyard, um, English Harbour. And yeah, it's extraordinary. I'll be honest. It is challenging. It is difficult, but it's incredible as well. It took 39 days to row across the Atlantic. You can do it as a solo, a duo, a trio, or a quad. I did it as a quad, as a team of four, um, which in one sense means you're faster as a boat, because you've got obviously more people to sort of interchange with and row with. In another sense, it adds a totally different dimension in terms of just the complexity of dealing with three other personalities, three other people who are at different stages of emotion. So yeah, I mean, it was ridiculous. It was an incredible challenge. It was hard for all a manner of reasons of being away from home at Christmas. I've got three young kids who are 7, 6, and 4. So, them understanding like where's daddy gone and why is he away and all of that. But I'm incredibly grateful for it. But it's billed as the world's toughest row, and there's a reason it's called that because it was seriously hard.
What was the biggest challenge that you faced during this rowing?
It's a really great question. I think what was the biggest challenge? Look, I mean, I think the biggest challenge for me was the restrictive nature of the boat, and then what that then extrapolated out to with all the other dynamic of having three other people. The furthest that I would move on board the boat is 1 meter. I'd get up, I'd change with my sort of cabin mate, my crewmate. He would go underneath. I'd start rowing. We do 2 hours, and we just keep changing like that. 2 hours on, 2 hours off, non-stop, 24 hours a day for 39 days, and not physically being able to go anywhere was so difficult. I found that just oppressive and very constrictive for me. So I think that was the hardest part. Was from my side was dealing with the fact that I can't move. Like I can't physically. Like I can't walk around anywhere. I can't go just like move over there for 5 minutes and come back here for 5 minutes. I had to just stay still because when you weren't rowing, you would come off the oars and you would go underneath. You basically slide your legs underneath where somebody was rowing, and then you basically on the left or the right hand side of the boat, and wherever you are, the boat is so sensitive. So if you're on the right hand side, the boat tilts to the right hand side like that. So then, everyone on deck would then move stuff. We have our drinking water, we move all that to the one side, we move the ropes. You might get somebody else to sit on the other side of the boat as well in the other cabin, so that the boat evens out. What that meant was for those 2 hours that you were off watch, you couldn't move, right? Because if you're on the right hand side, you decided, oh, we're just going to move over to the left for a bit, the whole boat would tip over. So I found that just so difficult psychologically, mentally to deal with, was the fact that I am stuck every 2 hours. I can't physically move, and I found that really hard to deal with.
I could imagine it will require incredible mental strength and resilience. So, and a lot of the activities that you have done pretty tough. So, do you do any mental preparation before that? Do you practice any mental strengths before doing these activities, or just on daily basis, maybe in your life?
Yeah, I think from my side, the thing I do a lot of is I do a lot of visualization, and I do quite a lot of mental rehearsal, particularly for this row for the race. I wanted to mentally rehearse, uh, how would I deal with the disappointment or the frustration of somebody not pulling their weight, or how would I deal with feeling frustrated or missing my family or like, so I would rehearse quite a lot of that. I don't, my mistake was I don't think I really appreciated how difficult I would find like then like being, as I just mentioned, like unable to move. Like I hadn't contemplated that. I didn't think that would be a problem. So that was a real challenge for me. But how I would manage conflict, how I would deal with my teammates, I'd rehearsed a lot. One thing we didn't do as a crew that I think I would advise anyone in a business or a team to do, we set, we set aspirational goals, right? We said, we want to race hard, we want to maybe try and win the race, all this sorts of stuff. But we also sort of said, look, we want to be in 8 out of 10 boats. That's what we sort of said we would be in terms of a grade. And what we didn't do was explore what that statement meant. And I think that's a really important facet of any team, any environment is, understanding and really drilling down into sort of the behavioral element of like what these things mean. An 8 out of 10 for Ola could mean something totally different than 8 out of 10 for Ollie in terms of like how you turn up, how you apply yourself every day, how you communicate, the work effort that you put in, the intensity that you put in, the expectation of when you take breaks, like how you prepare food, how you interact with the team, like all of that is something that I think is quite important that you nail. And we didn't go through that. And I think that was a miss because once you start to sort of assume that is, that's when all things go wrong. Because if I assume that Ola understands that 8 out of 10 means that we do this, this, and this, but I've never actually spoken to her about it, like both parties are going to be frustrated or disappointed because you might do more than I originally anticipated, and then you're expecting me to do more, and that's not within my sort of psyche and framework. And equally, you might do less, and I'm sat there sort of going, God, why is she having 5 breaks? Why is she not rowing hard? Or so I think that's something that I would really advise to anyone and any team is like, how often are you revisiting the goals and how well are you aligning the behaviors to those goals so that therefore you're very clear on expectations and as a result you can create accountability.
So you mentioned that you practice a lot of visualization uh, and they all seems to be related of how you will approach challenge, probably visualizing success. Do you plan for failure? And I think that is probably also an important question which could happen in life, in professional sport, in any kind of challenge. And also, how do you face and overcome them?
I mean, that's a great question. If I think about my time in sport or anywhere really, we spend a lot of time doing what I would call a pre-mortem. So most people do a post-mortem, right? What went wrong, which is a really important part, process as well. Like lots of people will do okay, we tried to do this. This is the outcome. What things went well and what things could we do better? Right? That's a typical process. What I and we do that, right? But what
Yes,
I
of
try
course.
to do is a pre-mortem, right? Which is we sit down as a team and say, like, okay, here's the goal. What are all the things that could go wrong? What could happen? Like, I don't know, we lose an oar, we get hit by if I use the row, we lose a teammate because they go down injured. We run out of food. I don't know, like just list all the things that may or may not happen, and then run through. Okay, well, what's the process that we would do to sort of mitigate against that? How would we handle that? How would we resolve that? Um, we also, on my team, Optimist, we do a lot of stuff around something called like empty chair thinking. So we have like a physical empty chair in our meetings, and we sort of say, okay, but we are all thinking in a certain way. We're all pushing towards a certain outcome. Like, but who or what needs to be sat in that chair to challenge that? What things are we missing? So, like, if Ollie, if your typical process or approach to things is sort of fairly blasé to risk or like opportunity. Let's just go. We'll build a plane in the sky. My empty chair is I need someone to be logical, prudent, risk assessing all the time. So if I can spend 5 or 10 minutes in the empty chair thinking about, okay, well, what would somebody that was risk averse, prudent, logical think about this. It gives me a different perspective and a consideration as to, okay, well, actually, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. So it doesn't mean that you're going to not fail, because I think if you're trying to do anything that is ambitious or create a world record, that is a world first. like, if you're setting world records, nobody's ever done that before. So as a result, there's a high possibility and probability that it might go wrong or it might fail. So I think there's a sort of, a willingness and an acceptance of, like, that is a possibility, that is that's a reality, but not focusing too much on that, and enjoying the opportunity and the possibility that it can go right.
I think positive mindset absolutely is very important. And Oli, you mentioned about your business, Optimist Performance, and how you apply things within the business. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? How did this idea came to you? How did you start it? And what your business actually does?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for letting me talk about it. But yeah, so I basically, what I noticed in my time in professional sports, and then my time out of professional sport in, like, the corporate sector. I did 10 years at PwC, and what I noticed was that in sport, we spent like 95% of the time focusing on, practicing, basically practice for 5% of the execution. And what I noticed in PwC was that we spent, well, 95% of the time like executing, and 5% of the time practicing. And I just didn't understand it. So, in the corporate space, having a challenging conversation, giving constructive feedback, um, managing conflict, leading with empathy, building trust. None of this was actually all this was talked about, but none of it was actually given any airtime for people to practice or understand how they do it. Right. So all the execution was around the technical capability of, like, I don't know, completing X, Y, and Z project plans and delivering on specific technical work. But it wasn't, there was no time really spent on, well, how are we collaborating effectively? How are we communicating in a way that everybody wants to be heard, and equally in a language that everyone wants to hear? How are we listening to people, properly listening to people, to make sure that they're being heard? Right. And these things are skills, like they're skill sets that you can work on and develop and be intentional about, but nobody does. Nobody does. It's expected that, like, oh, Ola, you are the chief executive of your business, so you should just know how to do this stuff, and you should be good at it. And I'm sure you are good at it, but, like, how often are you given the opportunity of intentional practice to get better at having a collaborative conversation or whatever it might be, right? So I noticed that wasn't happening. And so I established and built Optimist Performance with the, the principle of affording people the chance to have intentional practice, to be put into situations and scenarios that stress test the behavior. So if you want to get better at having a challenging conversation, let's put you into loads of environments that cause you to have a challenging conversation. And then let's practice it. Let's review how you did, and let's do it again. And let's do it again. Let's do it again. And let's put all the things that you would get typically faced with in your working environment, like financial pressure, time pressure, emotional pressure. Let's bring that into the experience so that it feels real and it feels sort of tangible. But let's still make sure that you are practicing getting better at that stuff. So, and if we can shift you from, like, 30% success rate to 40% success rate, 60% success rate, well, then you're going to resolve conflict much better. You're going to have more collaborative conversations. You're going to be a much more empathic leader, etc., 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 which then will improve the ROI, improve the motivation of your team, and improve your capability, your own delivery success. So that's what we do. That's sort of, how we operate, and we seem to be getting quite a lot of, interest and traction in the market because what we do is so different.
So you work with multiple individuals, like with the whole teams, or do you work with individual person from the team? For example, you can take a leader of the team and help them to manage the team in a better way.
Yeah, so we do both, right? I mean, ultimately, it's about developing on an individual level as well as then improving on the the collective level as well at the same time. So we'll work with teams. The biggest team that we'll work with is probably 30, 35 people. Um, so we will deliver a multitude of, let's say, services, pillars we call them, but so we will do health checker, so all the surveying and and then we'll do our diagnostics to understand what makes people move and understand a lot of their drivers. We'll layer that with individual coaching, group coaching. We'll layer that with facilitated sessions, and then we'll also bring in all the experience side that's laced all the way through. But it's all about personal and collective development.
Out of curiosity, would you apply some physical challenges on people during those training, considering that you have done a lot of challenging yourself, coming from the professional sport background? Is that is something that you implement in your training programs, or it's purely focused on the mindset and working with individuals?
Physical pressure, physical stress is a component of what people experience on a day-to-day level. More often than not, it's you know most people at their working environment are not out of breath and exhausted from like running a marathon. Right, that's not the physical pressure that they feel in their working environment. The physical pressure they feel in their working environment is they're exhausted because they're not getting any sleep. Their dietary management is poor, um, et cetera, et cetera. So, what the pressures that we would expose them to would occasionally be physical, mental, emotional. But, the aim of that is not that it needs to be um, relevant for the individual, right? It's pointless us taking everyone up Everest because it's too time consuming, it's too costly, and whilst it be a great experience, it's not necessarily relevant. What we're interested in is recreating how people feel. Like, what's the sentiment that you go through? So, know, what we need to do is create an environment where you feel tired, mentally tired, physically just exhausted, and then ask you to solve problems. And in that process, in those moments, we review and reflect as, okay, well, what would help this? What would help this get better? Was that a great outcome? There's a high probability that it's a great outcome and it was a great success. Brilliant. But equally, if it wasn't, how could we make it better? What are the things that we would do differently to improve that? And that can be a multitude of things, um, of which one of them is, okay, physically, I probably need to prepare better. Like, how well am I looking after myself every day so that my body and mind can perform in the way that it needs to? And lots of people neglect that.
I'm very glad you brought this up in terms of like wellness aspect and how do I look after my body on daily basis because my nature of work, I'm coming from medical background and I truly believe that this whole wellness aspect and how we look after ourselves is play a major role, how we perform at workplace, how we show up for other people. I wanted to ask you some questions related to that. Obviously, as a professional athlete, you allocate a lot of time and put your body through the lot of stress and physical activities, which is beyond ordinary person can do. But what would be your advice for an ordinary person who listening, how they can improve their physical, mental, and wellness? What is achievable steps? Is there is any advice that would come from you? Maybe something that you have been practicing after you have left professional sport?
No, I mean, firstly, I'd like to say, look, I really don't believe that I am extraordinary. Like, I think I'm just an ordinary human being. I do think that, right? I genuinely believe that I don't think I'm any different to any individual. If you like, the only difference might just be how I approach things or how I apply things or how sort of mentally and psychologically I tackle things. Consistency is the most underrated element um, of anyone's vocab, right? Everyone thinks that it's these big gestures and these huge, like intense moments of activity, whether that's physical, mental, emotional application. And don't get me wrong, they're great. Like you achieve great things when you are hyper focused, right? But unfortunately, that's not sustainable, right? You can't be hyper focused for 365 days a year for 80 years of your life. So the biggest thing I can advocate, and it's boring, I know this sounds boring, is if you can consistently turn up and do the basics well. If you can consistently turn up every day And talking of physical health, like drink 2 liters of water, exercise and move your body every single day, walk 10,000 steps, try and ensure you reduce your sugar content to as much as possible, live off lean meats and lean proteins, and and good nutritional, like vegetable with a good balance between carbohydrate, fats, protein. Like, you will be in like the absolute 0.01% elite of the world. So what is so simple to do, when you talk about it, the practical application of it is is it just never materializes. It's people don't do it, because, well, for whatever reason, it's routine, it's mundane, it's boring. Whatever the excuses are, the reasons, which are valid, right? Don't get me wrong. So like that discipline of being consistent and turning up every day and doing the right things, the simple right things, sleeping 8 hours a day, like all of these things would totally transform somebody's life. But but as human beings, we are always looking for, well, what can I do over the next week that would totally turn it around? Which there is value in, don't get me wrong, but it's not sustainable, and that's why you get those huge highs and those huge lows, because you're like, oh well, I felt amazing for that week when I did nothing but drink a green smoothie. Well, yeah, of course you did, because your body was detoxing, you were fasting, you were flushing your body out of all your toxins, wherever else. But it's not sustainable. You're not going to live off a green smoothie for the rest of your life. So as a result, now you've got the emotional, you know, dip, because you're eating other foods and your body doesn't look the same. You don't feel the same. You feel sluggish. You look worse naked, or whatever else it might be that goes through people's psychology, and that roller coaster ride continues. So the answer to your question, I would say, is like absolute consistency around the basics. And if you do that, you can then layer it with obviously lots of other things that would make it feel even better. But you would be in the absolute elite level of performance output if you just do that.
Well, I think you're very right that everyone is aware of what we should do, but fewer people actually do things that they're aware about. I think you're very right in that. In my life, I try to apply approach 80-20, where 80% of the time I'm trying to be good, exercise, move my body, eat clean, but then 20% of the time I also let myself to enjoy things which probably less healthy. I
Well,
think
you've got to do that, Ola, right? I mean, you can't be a saint all the time. You need to be a sinner from. It's nice to sometimes, be a devil and break the rules, and just try something different. So your 80-20 policy is brilliant.
well, I try to keep to it. So I would say probably not
Well,
all
it's
the
working.
time.
Look how much it's working, Ola. You're nailing it. Keep going.
Thank you, Ollie. I also wanted to ask you, you mentioned you have three young kids, and I think I also have three young children. I think as a parents, we carry a huge responsibility to our children to give them the great start in life and support them. So, what do you see as a great role model parents should be?
Well, Ola, I'll start by saying you don't look like you've got 3 children. You look like you're still ready to have another 3 children, whereas I look like I've been carrying 23 children. So I clearly need to be eating your Weetabix in the morning or whatever else it might be. But yeah, look, it's a really great question, and it's something that plays on my mind a lot, because I think before I had the responsibility of children and a family, I wasn't blasé, but I was much more sort of, I was less aware of risk, right? I would sleep in a cardboard box if I got things wrong. Like, I didn't care. I wanted, the opportunity was there, and I wanted to go for it, and I was excited, and I would pursue it vehemently. I'm not saying I don't do that now, but I am definitely acutely more aware of the risk of getting it wrong. Um, and it's weird, because I obviously want to role model and demonstrate to my children, that you should, be dedicated and be focused, and you work hard. Because I think they're all really important values that kids should learn. But if I'm true to myself, I, I would say they don't always see the truest version of dad, because I am so worried about maybe getting it wrong or making the wrong decision that directly impacts them or indirectly impacts them. And 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 I maybe some of the listeners will relate to this, but and I try desperately not to focus on that because I don't think it brings out a good version of myself. Equally, I don't think it's the right message to be, indirectly demonstrating to them. I think you need to be. It's okay to take risks. It's okay to fail. It's okay um, to dream about something and to not achieve it, because most people won't even dare to do any of that. So it's so important, I think, to demonstrate that. And I am always acutely aware of my own behavior that I do demonstrate that side because I know that inside my heart, sometimes and in my gut, I do feel like, oh God, like the stress of like I can't do that, and what if that goes wrong? And if you're like focusing on all maybe a bit more the negative narrative around stuff, and I have to constantly sort of check myself to make sure that I'm not being like that, and I'm focusing on all the reasons why I think it is good and why I've ended up in this place in the first place and why I need to embrace it. And by doing all of that, I'll demonstrate to the kids that great things come from being daring and showing great endeavor and being dedicated, being focused, and it's something that that I think about a lot. And so when you spoke about it, then it really hit a nerve or reminded me acutely of how I interact.
Well, I think that is, thank you very much for being so honest. I think that is one of the things that not everyone brings up, but it's so true. As a parent, one thing that, and probably emotion that you experience is worry because the amount of responsibility and pressure is quite high, I think. But also, you're thinking about your children's future, and often it makes you reflect on your upbringing as a child. Often we change our view to the world when we have our own children because that is just completely different level of responsibility. You're responsible for someone's future, someone's life. Which leads me to the next question, Oli. Is anything in your childhood that, when you look back, and you would say that help you to build this resilience, strong mindset, ability, want to achieve, to push your body through challenge, to succeed in sport? Was anything in particular that you would highlight or relate to?
Yeah, look, yeah, I mean, definitely, I would say to you, look, this is obviously stereotyping and it's not true for everyone, but I would say most people, particularly in sport, I think that have had some success, I think there are certainly some insecurities that sit at the bottom of their success, right? And so mine, I would definitely in my rugby career, I don't mind admitting all of this. I post my rugby career, I did a lot of therapy to try and help me manage my transition because I noticed some things in myself and my own behaviour that weren't going to be conducive for me moving forward. But anyway, we could talk about that separately. But if you like, from my childhood, one thing I noticed was that I came from a like happy family. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But like I had a divorced parents and I had quite a challenging relationship with my father, right? And so a lot of my I didn't know this at the time, but a lot of my adolescence and childhood was trying to get validation and approval from my dad. So if I scored the winning try, if I ran the fastest, if I got voted as the best kid in school for sport, if I got picked for England, if maybe he would show me praise, maybe he'd tell me he loved me, maybe he'd do this, right? So it was interesting that was now for me that was there's an interesting contradiction there because it brought me lots of success, but in another sense, it was sort of founded on poor foundations because they're not they're not solid, right? They're built on an insecurity of like I need something in return. I need love or I need uh, reward or
Attention.
praise, attention, right? So so as a as a kid and now having children, I am acutely aware of you know delivering that good balance to them, right? I think there's a potential mismatch in society at the moment where everyone talks about oh look, we're not going to have win or lose now, and we're not going to have, it's just all about participation. And don't get me wrong, I think it is great that we get more people and more kids in particular taking part and participating in sport or in exams or whatever it might be. And I think our role as parents is to be a great support structure around that, to challenge them when they're not doing very well, or they're underperforming, or they're not putting in the hard work, and equally to reward and recognize and praise them when they are. But I also think it's really important that they learn, what winning, the impacts of winning and losing. Like I think, unfortunately in life, you know, there are there are in every scenario there are winners and losers, right? And losing has this terrible stigma, but and it sounds cliche, but I learned the most from all the losses that I had in life. I didn't really learn much from winning, um, because when you win, it's just like, oh, that's great, you just keep going, right? So, and I'm not advocating that either. So I think it's really important that as kids growing up, that they're involved, they're interacting, that they're participating in so many things, so that they're being stimulated and figuring out what it is that they like and what it is they don't like and whatever else. But during that process, there is consequence, there is a jeopardy that they experience of, like, you call it win and losing or whatever you want, but succeeding and failing, because I think that builds character, I think that builds personality, I think that builds drive. But where I see my role as a dad in that is to be, you know, supportive on both sides of the coin. You know, to support and champion when they need it, and maybe when they lose, and when they win, but also to challenge and, um, yeah, and not criticized, but challenge and be constructive when they're not right, when they're not pulling their weight, but they're still winning, or when they're losing, but there's been a reason as to why, right? So, because I don't think it should all be sunshine and rainbows. Life isn't about sunshine and rainbows. I think you only appreciate great things because there is jeopardy. Ola, you've built a brilliant business. It must feel exhilarating to do that. It also must feel exhausting. There are highs and lows. But if someone at the beginning of it said, "Oh, look, when you start this, it's just going to work. It's going to work. You're going to make loads of money, and it just anything you try will work." It's
No
just
one
boring.
tells
It's a
you
bit,
that.
yeah, but it's a bit boring. What I mean is, it'd be boring, right? You'd be like, "Oh, well, if I know this is going to succeed, and I know I'm just going to win every game that I play, where's the challenge? Like the jeopardy, the risk of losing is what makes the success of winning so much fun. And if that
Absolutely.
and if that risk is gone, well then, if that jeopardy's gone, well then, like, it doesn't seem that attractive, you know. Uh, you know. So anyway,
No,
that's my view.
I completely agree with you on this, Ollie. And I have a feeling that you probably still have another challenge in yourself. So, do
Always,
you?
always. Yeah, yeah,
What it will
always.
be?
Yeah, look, and I really want to stress this. Like, I think, we talked about it earlier, like the consistency being it, right? And we talked about children and being like, for me, the biggest challenge is parenthood, because it's relentless. It's every day until your last dying breath, right? They are there. My three kids are there. They're going to be they're going to be bigger and bigger and have more complex problems as they go on, but they're there. I'm never getting rid of them. I don't ever want to get rid of them. But that is undoubtedly my most exhausting and most relentless challenge, but equally the most exhilarating, of helping to shape and support the lives and the experiences of three incredible human beings. So, like, I genuinely see that as my greatest challenge, and so many other people go through that challenge and living that challenge right now. They might not see it in the same way that I do, but they are. And as I say to you, like, the next challenges, in a weird way, I know that it's probably how our society's wired, but loads of people see them as like extraordinary and amazing. Like, you're going to go row the Atlantic, or you're going to go sail around the world. But the reality is, these things are like small pockets of time. For me to row the Atlantic, it took a long time. Don't get me wrong, but it was 39 days. I'm going to be alive for 80 years, hopefully, if not more. Um, so I think, what's with the next challenge, I honestly don't know. I'm still in sort of recovery from the last one, from the row. But I think, I'd like to complete the trilogy of, we did the North Pole, we did Everest, I'd like to do the South Pole. Um, but the the magic of those things is not the. I know this is easy for me to say. Like, it's not the achievement that's the great thing, because the medal on the wall or the certificate on the wall, it just gathers dust. If someone said to me once, like, yesterday's history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is the present. That's why they call it a gift. And I really believe in, like, relishing the moment that you exist in. And the reason why I mention that about those certificates and whatever else is, like, once you've done something, like, once you've, I don't know, like, once you've made £1,000, you just want to go make £10,000. Once you made 10,000, you want to make 100. Once you made 100, you want to make a million. Like, there's always more. There's always this pursuit of more. And because the reality is, once you reach the destination, you just want to go to another one, right? But the really enjoyable process, the really enjoyable part of it is the process, right? Everyone's, it is cliche. Everyone says the journey, but it is genuinely like the community that builds, the learning that you gain, the money that you raise, the fitness that you get, that you that you make, the mental fortitude that you build. They're the amazing things that you gain in the process. But so many people overlook them because they're always just focused on, will I make the destination? Will I get there in time? I have to reach it. I have to reach that. I have to do it.
But you know, Oli, not everyone maybe have this mindset, because I think that is probably half of the definition of entrepreneur as well. You know, what's next? What's next challenge? I want more. Because for every person who has those ambition, I think there is always a person out there who happy with the way how things are for them. Otherwise, everyone in the world will be competing, achieving, but so many people happy with life how they have it, you know, have a job, have a family, have enough. Do you not think so?
And that's what I think is amazing. Those people are probably the ones that, not, this isn't the right word, but like, I envy the most, because they're just happy. They're happy in their skin. They're happy in, them. Their greatest challenge is just getting out of bed every day, having, having breakfast and enjoying their time with whoever they're with, right? That, you know, I think it's important from my perspective to have sort of some goals to work towards, but that's just because how I am wired, right? But people that are comfortable in their skin and are just enjoy what life throws at them, I'm envious of, right? I really am envious, because I think they've got it figured out the most. All the people like
Well,
the entrepreneur or ever that you say, like, they're constantly trying to do more and do more. Like, my challenge to those people is, like, when is it enough? Like,
exactly.
will it ever be enough, right? And that's, like, that's what's so fascinating about, like, life, without getting too philosophical on it all. But yeah, I'm loving the conversation. All, I'm grateful for it. But yeah, that's sort of my 10 pence worth on it all.
No, it has been absolutely great conversation, Ollie. And I think, you know, maybe we need to have some room for another podcast. But coming to the
Yeah.
end of this conversation, I wanted to just ask you the last question. So, for the listeners, for people who want to change their physical, mental strengths, if you would give just one piece of advice, what it would be?
If I'm allowed to give two, I would say, um, the classic of, like, do the simple things well. So the kiss analogy, keep it simple, stupid. I think that if you just do that consistently over time, you'll get so many incredible results. Um, and then if you like one sort of daily thing, I would recommend that, even I don't do this myself all the time, but, like, I try and advocate it and I try and do it. Is before you start any day, and when you end every day, take 5 minutes before you get out of bed and look at your phone and get in the shower or whatever else. Those 5 minutes or 2 minutes, whatever it is, when you lay down first thing in the morning and when you lay down last thing at night, and take 2 minutes just to remind yourself of all the things that you're grateful for, like, an attitude of gratitude. Like, when you wake up in the morning, like, I'm so grateful that I've woken up today. I'm so grateful that I'm lying next to my husband or wife, or I'm so grateful that my kids are next door and they're all happy, or that we've got a roof over our head. Whatever it is, that I'm going to go out today and play a football match. Whatever the things you're grateful for, and remind yourself of those things when you go to bed at night as well. And I think you'll find that that changes your entire perspective on life, but it will dramatically improve your mental resilience and your ultimately your commitment to your physical, mental, emotional well-being.
Well, thank you very much, Oli. And I think that is a very useful and most important, achievable advice. Thank you. It has been a great pleasure.
Awesome. Lovely to be on. Thanks ever so much for having me.